On August 20th, 1949, the Washington Post ran the front page story. Freeze Trees, Mount Rainier boy, reported, held in devil's grip. Inside was the story of Roland Doe, a 14-year-old boy living in Mount Rainier, Maryland, who started to experience seemingly impossible symptoms, speaking in Latin, commanding objects to move on their own, and breaking into violent tantrums. His horrified parents went to neurologist after neurologist, psychologist after psychologist, to no avail. It was only after a series of exorcisms, from a series of Catholic priests, that Roland was cured, seemingly exorcised of the demons that caused his malady. And this, the story of an apparently possessed 14-year-old in Maryland, is what inspired William Peter Blatty to write one of the most influential books of the last 100 years, The Exorcist. The book exchanges the 14-year-old boy, Roland, for 12-year-old girl, Regan MacNeil, daughter of movie star Chris MacNeil. She becomes possessed seemingly to do a mixture of playing with a Ouija board and, her parents being divorced and her babysitter being promiscuous. We'll get back to that. Her possession leads to a series of horribly unusual symptoms, moving in impossible ways, violently shaking her bed, and saying a lot of things that I can't repeat on YouTube. Chris seeks out a medical explanation to no avail, before asking handsome Dr. Priest Damien Carras for an exorcism. Carras conducts a significant amount of research in order to prove that Regan is possessed to Catholic officials. Oddly, the research takes up a large section of the book, but the actual asking for an exorcism is essentially hand-waved away in 2 sentences. Once granted the right to conduct the rite of exorcism, Carras and experienced exorcist, Father Merrin, get right to exorcising Regan. The exorcism, however, goes awry, and Merrin is killed. Left with no other option, Carras takes the demon into himself and self-defenestrates, presumably killing both himself and the demon. Presumably. The book actually cuts to Chris when all of this is supposedly happening, who just hears some yelling and glass breaking, and goes upstairs to find Merrin dead, the window shattered, and Regan cured. Which coheres nicely with the overarching theme of skepticism throughout the book. Like, oh, what really happened up there? Was she really possessed? But does not really cohere with the demon possession being proven earlier in the book, including by a scene right before where the bed floats a foot off the ground. The book is good, I guess. It's a bit overwritten, in my opinion. Probably due to the copious amounts of drugs used to write it, but it generally flows well and has good prose, and is a pretty breezy read, as long as you can get past all of the gross bodily fluids and shocking for the sake of shocking scenes within it. I thought the parts with Carras looking up historical possessions and trying to disprove his own suspicions was actually really neat, and showed that Blatty did a lot of research on this topic. And it's surprisingly pretty funny too. There were a lot of jokes in this book that got a chuckle out of me. Which makes sense given Blatty's previous career as a comedy screenwriter. When it was released, the book was a smash hit. It topped the New York Times bestsellers list for 19 weeks. And beyond that, it's probably one of the most influential works of the last 60 years, especially after its 1973 film adaptation. The film is a masterpiece, a triumph that has stood the test of time. So good that it has not only maintained a place in popular culture, but it also spawned an entire new genre of film. Sure, there were a few films about exorcisms and exorcists made before this, and we'll actually talk about one of those films later in the video. But it was really after this film that the genre started to become, well, a genre. And this genre even includes 4.5 sequels to The Exorcist. Half because Dominion and Exorcist the Beginning are actually the same film. Roughly, The Beginning is just a retooled version of Dominion that was released before Dominion because Dominion was deemed by execs to be too slow. However, when Exorcist the Beginning underperformed, Dominion was then released. Neither is particularly good. And there's actually kind of another half sequel with the 9th configuration, which is the second part of Blatty's Faith trilogy, bookended by The Exorcist and The Exorcist 3. And although I don't think it's anything to write home about, it's definitely the better of the Exorcist 2s, given how the actual Exorcist 2 is.
Exorcist 2, The Heretic.
And of course, there are hundreds and hundreds of other movies, heavily inspired or directly ripping off The Exorcist. And something else interesting. The book and the movie kind of created the modern idea of an exorcism. In 1972, the year after the book was published, the Order of Exorcism, which had been conferred to all Catholic priests since the 3rd century, was abolished. When Damien says in the movie that you'd have to go back to the 16th century to get an exorcism,
if a person's, possessed by a demon or something? How do they get an exorcism?
Well, the first thing, I'd have to get him into a time machine and get him back to the 16th century.
He's not just saying that because it's a cliche, although it is creating one. It's the truth of the time, but after the book, and especially after the movie's release, requests for exorcisms skyrocketed all around the world. Suddenly, everyone had a little Pazuzu inside of them. And it wasn't just within Catholic communities. The Protestants started exorcising people too, which previously was not really something that they did. Watching a lot of these movies about exorcism, it's kind of amazing how much they take from the book. Priest with doubts, lots of inconclusive medical tests, physically impossible body horror, and conservative values. The Exorcist, the book, is a deeply conservative work. The book echoes traditional Catholic teachings, railing against modernism in the church, and reifying the existence of the devil and of demons. It also seems to suggest the world is in a state of decline, a state seemingly brought on by the counterculture movements of the 60s. It even goes further to suggest that the state of the world and Reagan's liberal upbringing are responsible for her demonic possession, taking special care to emphasize the harm of divorce. Something that apparently concerned Blatty a great deal, notwithstanding his own 3 divorces. None of this is surprising given Blatty's own conservative Catholic politics, and that he apparently wrote the book as an apostolic work, one meant to bring people back into the arms of the Catholic Church. And this conservative outlook and these conservative politics have become one of the most endearing traits of exorcism films even to today. For a modern example, let's talk about 2023's The Pope's Exorcist. In this film, an Italian Russell Crowe, and the titular Pope's exorcist, is tasked with going to a very Irish-looking Spain and exorcising a young American boy. The boy's family are moving into a spooky abbey they inherited when the father of the family died in a horrific car accident, witnessed by the boy. When they arrive at the abbey, they are comically dysfunctional. The daughter is listening to loud music, wearing provocative clothing,
Amy, we're not in America anymore. You can't dress like that.
And smoking. Her younger brother is horrifically traumatized and hasn't spoken since seeing his dad get skewered. After exploring the basement of the house, the brother becomes possessed by a demon and starts acting in ways that are definitely not rooted in wholesome family values.
Breastfed me, mommy!
It's then left to Italian Russell Crowe and his young priest sidekick to exorcise both the young boy as well as his sister, who is also possessed, and solve the mystery of their new home. And what is needed? Nothing medical, of course. Instead, it is a re-establishment of faith and of family values, the priests coming to terms with their past mistakes, through confession, of course, and a whole lot of praying. The hallmarks are all there. A lack of family cohesion, secularization, and trauma all lead to demonic possession. And only by returning to family values, and more importantly, religious values, can these demons be properly exorcised. There's a quite literal demonization of behavior not sanctioned by the Catholic Church. There are priests struggling with their faith, who can only succeed by further committing to the Church's teachings. All of this contributes to the standard formula of an exorcism film, one that can be seen in just about every film of this genre. The Pope's Exorcist adds another little conservative wrinkle as well. With an almost throwaway line, this film moves into performing apologetics for some of the worst crimes of the Catholic Church.
The exorcist becomes possessed himself.
Padre Ojada.
You know he is the man who convinced Queen Isabella of the need for an inquisition. So that means, from the time he is possessed in 1475, everything that happens after this is the work of the devil. Centuries of persecution and torture, the worst abuses of the Inquisition, all started by the friar and done in the name of God, by the devil.
It puts the blame on the torture, the displacement, and the execution of hundreds of thousands of people, not on the very real humans who did it, but on demonic possession. It was not the errors of church policy and the cruelty of individuals, but demons, incorporeal beings who made these people commit these atrocities. Playing defense for the Catholic Church is often a classic exorcism film feature, and it doesn't even have to be about events that happened hundreds of years ago. The Exorcism of Emily Rose is a 2005 film, based very heavily on the real-life case of Anneliese Michel, a 23-year-old German woman with epilepsy and related psychosis, who, along with her family, had become convinced that she was possessed, and who stated that she needed to die to atone for the wayward youth of the day and the apostate priests of the modern church. and her wish was granted by her family, along with 2 priests, who stopped consulting doctors and, in 1976, starved her to death in the conceit of an exorcism, which led to the trial and conviction of the priests and of her parents of negligent homicide. The film takes heavily from the real case, focusing on the trial of the priest, not priests as in the real case, accused of negligent homicide. And there's an interesting question here about consent and the power of belief, and how it might make someone's symptoms worse, or possibly lead to their cure. But The Exorcism of Emily Rose is not interested in asking interesting questions. Instead, it spends its 120-minute runtime showing you that the priest is actually a very relatable guy who cares a whole bunch, and also that it was actually seemingly demons the whole time, as spooky things begin to happen to the agnostic defense attorney, and schlocky horror scenes are peppered throughout. It also completely makes up details about the case, like having a doctor in the room during the exorcism, which was not the case in real life, and again is only there to play defense for the priest and to show that they weren't actually homicidally negligent. The film even goes so far as to cast doubts on the diagnoses Annalise was given, with claims that psychosis and epilepsy are actually completely unrelated, and only a self-important quack would diagnose them as one and the same.
But isn't psychosis an entirely different medical condition from epilepsy?
Yes, in my
So,
experience,
doctor, aren't
it
you
is.
selectively choosing what parts of Emily's experiences fit your epilepsy diagnosis, while simply ignoring those which might indicate something else? Doctor, is psychotic epileptic disorder a common medical term, or did you just make it up?
This is, of course, despite the well-established connection of psychosis to epilepsy, with people with epilepsy being 8 times more likely to experience psychosis, especially after an event. And there's even a type of psychosis stemming from temporal lobe epilepsy that manifests as hyperreligiosity and with religious visions. This film goes out of its way to defend the priest who starved an actual young woman to death. It creates facts and it warps history. And I want to clarify something here. Just because they changed her name, moved the story to somewhere in America, somehow this movie takes place in an area in which a very devout Catholic family lives, but is also the Midwest in the middle of nowhere, but is also within the jurisdiction of a major city court, and made it 1 priest instead of 2. This is still a movie about Annalise Michel. It opens with a nebulous based on a true story. It directly lifts many actual events from her life, and even ends with a set of title cards which describe actual events related to Annalise after her death. On those title cards, they act as the final knife twist of this film. They reify the beliefs that led to her torture and death, presenting them as justified. This movie exists partially to be a schlocky horror film, and partially to frame a story of torture and abuse as one on the importance of faith and of conservative values. 2024's The Deliverance follows in the footsteps of The Exorcism of Emily Rose and uses demonic possession as a cover-up for abuse. Also based on a true story, this film is just about as malicious, if not more so, than Emily Rose. It follows Ebony, a single mother of 3 struggling to pay her bills and struggling with alcoholism. Her problems get worse when CPS gets involved, due to her abusing her children. Supposedly unrelated to their frequent abuse at the hands of their mother, her children start to act very strange. As always, it's nothing medical or psychological. Instead, it's demons, as Ebony finds out once she meets a Pentecostal preacher, who reinstills faith into Ebony's life and offers to perform a deliverance, which is essentially just an exorcism, but this time it's a Pentecostal and not a Catholic performing it.
I had to cast out that demon. I had to do what we call the deliverance.
Like in the Exorcist movie.
I don't do no exorcisms. I don't need an intercessor. Jesus Christ is my intercessor. If you act in the power and the authority of Jesus Christ, you can touch a body, and the demon will run.
Demons?
Yes, demons.
It initially goes awry, before Ebony suddenly is filled with the Holy Spirit and succeeds in exorcising her child. The movie ends with all of her problems being solved, all because she found God. And hey look, she's even getting back together with her husband.
I've been in touch with your dad. I'm gonna try and work things out.
Her traditional family is being rebuilt. In the real-life case that this movie is based on, a clinical psychologist noted, "The youngest child's stories about the possession were bizarre, fragmented, and illogical, and changed each time he told them. This appears to be an unfortunate and sad case of a child who has been induced into a delusional system perpetuated by his mother," she wrote. Another psychologist reported similar findings about the older two children.
The Deliverance chooses to validate the delusional system created by this mother, to justify it, to make her into a heroic figure who just so happened to beat her children, all in the name of religion. It frames CPS authorities as getting in the way of what needs to be done, frames abuse as the result of demons and secularism. Why are the children acting strangely, you ask? Not because of the horrific abuse they're suffering, but because of the demons that are possessing them. The way to stop abuse is not by tackling systemic issues, but by ushering the perpetrators closer into a relationship with God, so says the star of the film. The solution to trauma, to child abuse, to alcoholism, to poverty is framed as being only found in religion. Never mind, of course, how religion can often be used to justify child abuse. If only all of these single moms had just prayed more, then all of their problems would have gone away. The Deliverance presents a world in which the solution to all of society's problems are to be found in a return to religion, in family cohesion, and in conservative values. It's not a coincidence that these movies came about in the 1970s. It's an easy and overdone, but essentially accurate reading to say that these movies depict a backlash to the modernist strides of the 1960s. Reagan's parents are divorced. Her mother is independent and irreligious, and her mother's assistant is implied to be having premarital sex. Amy in The Pope's Exorcist, although she is not the main victim of possession, is into skimpy clothing and smoking and rock music. These actions, which oppose traditional femininity and represent the gains made by the feminist movement in the 60s, are presented as the raison d'etre of the possession itself, the evil that let the demons in. The demons, of course, who must be cast out by the priest, the always male, always collared champion of traditional values. Along with secularization, another surefire way in these films to open the door for possession is trauma. The children in The Pope's Exorcist have been traumatized by the death of their father, with Henry, the young boy, being more susceptible to possession because he more directly witnessed the death of his father.
The Right, another trope-filled exorcism film that is oddly kind of a YA movie, directly says that it was the assault of a woman by her father and the subsequent pregnancy that led to her being possessed.
How did you enter her?
With her father's seed.
And with the prevalence of this trope, you almost expect there to be some sort of metaphor created. An analogy, trauma as possession, the feeling of not being in control of your own body made literal, an exploration of how trauma can make you feel alienated from yourself. Even the behaviors that these films associate with being possessed, although certainly exaggerated, can be pretty reminiscent of certain acting out behaviors that can act as a defense mechanism after trauma. In many real-life cases, including the one that inspired the exorcism, it seems that some sort of trauma was at play. But no, I can't think of a single one of these films that actually does something super interesting with trauma. In almost every film, it serves just to make you feel sympathetic with the possessed, to show that they are blameless, really, for the loss of faith that led to their possession, showing that it wasn't a fully conscious choice to be irreligious. No, it had to have been some horrific trauma. Otherwise, they would have been an apostate. And is there anything worse? Exorcism films are perennially not very good. A cursed genre, if you will. They are almost always poorly made and almost always have a bad conservative message. However, there are exceptions to this. Well, 3 exceptions that I can think of. Well, actually, maybe 2.5? The first that we're going to talk about is that half, and that's The Exorcist. Like the 1973 one. Like the one that kind of kickstarted this whole genre. Now, this may be a slightly controversial take, and I don't expect you to fully buy into my view on this film. I mean, it's one of my favorite films of all time, and I think there's quite a bit of bias in my viewing it as something that actually fits my political views than something that goes directly against them. I mean, few people would ever argue about this film's quality. It's a surefire masterpiece in every way that a film can be. But people often concede that it's a masterpiece with a conservative bent, and I disagree. Which I know goes against the words of the author himself, William Blatty. However, even though his name is above the title, this was not a solo project by William Blatty. William Friedkin, the director, had just as much a hand in bringing it to the screen, arguably having even more control than Blatty over the content of the film itself, with him co-writing the script and editing the film without the input of Blatty. And although it's mostly a faithful adaptation, there are a lot of differences between the book and the movie. For one, the movie puts a lot less emphasis on the secular aspects of Reagan's life. The divorce is not as prominent. Neither is the decay of society, or Sharon's love life. But what I actually want to focus on is the framing of something that happens, presumably, in both works, and the reasoning that I think the movie escapes the conservative framing of the book.
So, in both the book and movie, Reagan is not cured by the exorcism. In fact, it fails catastrophically.
Father Merrin, the expert exorcist and the symbol of strong Catholic faith, is killed trying to perform the rite. All of the progress they do make with the rite is undone, seemingly telling us that it never worked to begin with. The rite of exorcism is shown to be ineffective at actually accomplishing what it sets out to do, even when headed by the expert, albeit sickly, exorcist Father Merrin. It is Damien's suicide that actually leads to Regan being cured, which is not a very Christian thing to do, as pointed out by Friedkin himself. It is a pretty radical thing to do, which fits well with an often overlooked line from earlier in the film. It's near the very beginning. In it, Chris is filming a scene for some movie about campus protest. She walks up the stairs and gives a speech, which includes this line.
If you want to affect any change, you have to do it within the...
This line is a movie-only addition. In the book, the whole campus protest scene is different, with Chris's character taking the side of the protesters and wanting to tear down the building or something. So why include this line? Well, I think it serves as her character's thesis statement and acts as her driving ideology throughout the film. Whenever Regan gets possessed, Chris tries to get help from traditional institutions. Which, important side note, it should be noted that what possesses Regan is something very traditional, something ancient, some evil spirit that has existed for a very, very long time. The opening of the movie goes through a great effort to show you that the spirit is old and ancient, something emphasized much less in the book. This is not a representation of something on the horizon, like feminism or female sexuality. It's something that is buried deep within our society, and its reemergence serves to poison and nearly kill the next generation. And what happens when Chris goes the traditional route to get rid of this traditional spirit? It fails, over and over again. Her attempts to cure Regan just result in more damage being done. Better put, her attempts to reform Regan all result in failure. And so, what does she do? She goes to the Catholic Church to request an exorcism, an ancient rite from an ancient institution, one of the most ancient institutions still around. She is trying to fight something ancient with something also ancient. And how does the exorcism go? It also fails. Father Merrin, a representation of traditional Catholicism, a celebrated priest, is killed. The only thing that cures Regan is not rooted in any tradition or creed or dogma. It's Father Damien's suicide. It's radical action. This radical action, this unprecedented action, is what cures Regan. This evil, ancient spirit is gotten rid of not by traditional means, but by something completely new. So, is the message of this film that you need to kill yourself to enact change? No. I think it's advocating for doing something else, for going outside the system. It's telling us that going the usual route, through reform, doesn't work. You can't change these ancient, evil systems. They must be destroyed. The Exorcist, the foundation of this whole conservative slop genre of film, is a surprisingly radical film. At least if you view it exactly like me. And I think there actually is a reason that many people say this film is conservative, and those arguments are not without merit. I just think it's a bit hazier than people usually make it out to be. But now that I'm getting off my soapbox, I want to talk about two films in which there's no haziness when it comes to their views. The first film I want to talk about is one of the pre-The Exorcist films about exorcism, and that's 1971's The Devils.
The Devils is an adaptation of Aldous Huxley's The Devils of Loudun, and is based on actual events from the 1600s. It recounts the story of Urbain Grandier, a Catholic priest in the French city of Loudun, who is up to a lot of very non-priestly activities, namely sleeping around. When Catholic officials come to tear down the city's walls, due to the relative equality between Catholics and Protestants within them, Grandier protests. The Catholic officials then seek to undermine Grandier, eventually accusing him of witchcraft and possession, stemming from accusations made by a sexually repressed and obsessed nun, Sister Jeanne. What follows is a psychosexual fever dream of a film, showing the worst abuses of the Catholic Church as they torture nuns under the pretense of exorcism, and maim and eventually burn alive Grandier. Watching The Devils now, it feels oddly prescient. Despite being made before the exorcism genre even existed, it almost seems like a direct critique of the politics of the films to come. The use of possession claims as a way of scapegoating the other, as a way to assert power, as a way to demonize behavior that goes against societal norms. The return to tradition inherent in exorcism plots is rendered as abuse, torture, and sexual assault. It uses intensely transgressive imagery to critique power, especially power originating from the church and state. It harshly critiques Catholic dogma of proper behavior, showing repression is dangerous. The traditional society The Devils depicts, and the one that so many of these films seemingly want to return to, is one built on hypocrisy, bloodshed, and cruelty. It warns against a return to tradition, against a return to superstition, and against a return to religion. As a film, it is radical in its outlook. So radical, in fact, that it was given an X rating when it was originally released, and has only, officially, been available in a butchered form for the last 50 years. Apart from a brief theatrical director's cut in 2002, it has taken until this year, 2026, that a proper uncut version is being released, apparently along with a theatrical re-release. Better late than never, I suppose. I would highly, highly recommend The Devils. It really is a masterpiece, pretty much on every level, with outstanding acting, visuals, cinematography, and a whole lot to say. However, it is kind of hard to come by, at least until that re-release, and contains a lot of imagery that may be pretty triggering for a lot of folks. So this recommendation does come with a bit of caution.
And there is another fantastic exorcism film worth mentioning, and it's the polar opposite of The Devils, and that's 2006's Requiem.
Where The Devils is loud and unabashed in its message, Requiem is quiet and thoughtful. It's shot almost like a documentary, almost all intimate handheld shots, with slow scenes and naturalistic acting.
Soll ich dir ausreden wollen, was dir geschehen ist, Michaela?
Weil es vielleicht verrückt ist und weil ich krank bin.
Die Welt macht uns an der Seele krank. Ich bin fast an ihr verzweifelt.
But that doesn't mean that it has any less to say on the subject than The Devils. Requiem is about the same case as The Exorcism of Emily Rose. But whereas Emily Rose spends its time with schlocky scares and trying to defend the man who murdered a young woman, Requiem spends its time with the woman herself. It tells her story with an empathy and care that Emily Rose was completely incapable of giving. It details how someone can fall into this belief that they are possessed through parental and clerical influence, combined with the effects of stress, religious guilt, and illness. It highlights the human part of possession. It is a film that is quiet, that is considerate, and is contemplative. It forms a contrast with the tropes of exorcism movies past, showing how those beliefs endorsed by them, namely that moving away from one's faith and participating in secular activities can lead to possession, can influence someone to believe that they are in fact possessed. There are no scares in Requiem. Nothing jumps out at you or distorts its face. And yet, it manages to be horrifying. A woman slowly falling into extreme belief that you know from the outset will ultimately cost her her life.
Like The Exorcism of Emily Rose, Requiem ends with title cards, detailing actual events that happened to Anneliese Michel. Where The Exorcism of Emily Rose uses them to further push its message, to justify the death and torture of a woman, Requiem uses them to simply tell the truth, the end result of those beliefs.
If the day would only come, then you might just appear, even though you'd soon be gone. When I reached out my hand.
There are so many exorcism films, and I haven't seen them all, but I feel like I've seen enough as to get a general picture. As a genre, they tend to reinforce conservative values. They push against secularism, and push towards a return to an imagined tradition, one based in religion. They reinforce ideals of traditional family values and religiosity, and demonize behavior considered unacceptable by some grand old institution. They are also usually incredibly derivative, following in the same footsteps of a book written 50 years ago. However, this doesn't have to be the case. As seen with The Devils and with Requiem, this genre can make some really new and some really radical works. Of course, it must be considered that The Devils is older than The Exorcist itself, and has been left in a butchered state since its release, with it only getting an official uncut version this year. And Requiem is a small German film that is pretty much unavailable on any streaming service. Oh well, I tried to be positive for once.
Thank you for watching this video. I wanted to try something different than what I've made before, and hopefully it turned out pretty well. The idea for this video sprung out of a discussion I had during a movie club meeting, and so I want to thank everyone in the movie club for helping develop the ideas that eventually became this video. So thank you, Alex, Ben, Delbert, Effie, Josh, and Julian. And as always, thank you to my partner Luna for all the support and feedback in making this.